Thanks everyone for coming. Happy Tuesday. Guess it might be Wednesday in some places. I don't think it's Monday anywhere, but I could be wrong. So today we're here to talk about embedded dashboards in Preset. So this will be kind of like hopefully a useful introductory workshop. We'll have a demo, which will be great. And I'll kind of walk through what I really want to hopefully help people understand here is just kind of the life cycle. Like what is kind of the architecture, like really understanding how the requests need to be made and how data flows. There's kind of a few moving pieces to the way we do embedded, which is a little bit unique and different. I'll talk a little bit about the steps for enabling it. So there's a few steps that are needed. If you log into Preset right now, it's not something you could just use right away. There's kind of just a few steps you need to do before you can get started there. Sandboxing dashboards, I'll talk a little bit about just some general heuristics and tips that we have for making sure that your embedded experience is good and somewhat isolated, and then we'll have Q&A. So I recommend using the Q&A tab at the bottom. I know some of you just use the chat tab to answer kind of my first question, but if you could use Q&A, that'd be great. That makes it really easy. It makes it easy for the presenter to just go through question by question towards the end. I also have one of my colleagues here, so if there's some questions he can answer that are like quick or a link or something, he can also help out. So Q&A is going to be great for that. And yeah, so this is kind of the overview, and we'll get started. I did want to quickly mention, I know not everyone is a Preset user, so I did want to mention kind of our two products. The workshop today is going to be focused on Preset, so it's kind of how we do things with embedded at Preset. It overlaps with the way it's done on the Superset side, but it is a little bit different. So just for context and to set the stage there, this is definitely going to be kind of a Preset focused workshop and demo. So for Preset Cloud, this has been our most popular product. We've had this for over a year now. We're actually celebrating 1 year of being a GA in 2 days, which is really exciting. So we run bleeding edge Superset. We take the master branch, basically subtract 2 weeks, and then run it and test it and QA it ourselves. So you get kind of the latest and greatest. We turn on all the feature flags that we're comfortable with. You get SOC 2 compliance as well. Let me just make this full screen. So you get SOC 2 compliance as well, which is great for people who need that. We're one of the few tools that give single sign-on support, even in kind of our professional tiers, which is a little bit rare. If we have support and training, you get a bunch of isolated sandbox workspaces, and we have a really powerful proprietary UI for role-based access control. And on the enterprise and professional features, we also have kind of our own API and SDK library. We have our kind of flavor of embedded SDK, which I'll talk about later. And of course, you can get enterprise SLA and support as well. In the last few months, we've been working on Preset Managed Private Cloud, and this is kind of generally available as well. So if this is something you're interested in, it's basically the exact same Preset experience, but in your private cloud. It's currently Amazon only, so AWS, but I hear that we're working on the other two big cloud providers as well. And we currently don't do anything for on-prem. So you can go to our website, preset.io, and learn more. And first, I'd actually like to start with a demo of embedded. So we'll kind of go in an interesting reverse order here. I think embedded is great because it's actually the best thing to demo. It's kind of literally about demoing something that normally is kind of locked within the tool. So I'll actually start with a demo, and then we'll kind of work backwards from what is kind of the minimum requirements to make this demo happen. And then I'll kind of actually flip the script and start with then I'll showcase kind of from scratch, how do you actually set this up and the steps needed, and kind of follow on resources as well if this is something that you'd like to do yourself. So to start with the demo, here's kind of a local version, a local demo that's working. It's just easier to do something locally, right? So here we have just running at port 5000. I basically have a small little Flask app that I have, and then it's really simple. Not a HTML, CSS expert, so I'm sure there's people here who are much better at this than I am. But this is basically this is the kind of simplified version of it essentially. So you have kind of your own HTML, CSS, whatever you want to put. The way we do embedding is through iFrame currently. So this is basically a giant iFrame. So you can scroll down it. You can resize this, of course, to get kind of a better experience as well. And we should be able to actually get this. There we go. So you can remove the kind of scroll bars. and then you can put stuff below as well. So this is basically the way to think about it is kind of a black boxed iframe experience. And so you start with just kind of a simple HTML, CSS page, essentially, and then there's a mounting point, and then the iframe is kind of added and injected in right there with everything that you need, and the dashboard is fetched. And of course, I'll talk through what that means and how that all works. But this is kind of the preset dashboard experience, right? You have filters, they kind of work as you think they would. You hit apply, and it on our end, we're kind of querying the data, we're updating the charts. Of course, you can hide the filters if you'd like. So if you wanted to, you can actually even remove the filters entirely from your dashboard if you really just want to showcase charts, almost as kind of images, right? So if you just want to showcase charts, you can definitely do that as well. So, but this is kind of coming in from preset, right? So this is what you would see. This is the dashboard itself. And so this is kind of the exact same experience. All of the features that you would expect in a read-only experience work right out of the box. With nothing too fancy. We are, of course, being clever on which features that we're hiding from an editing standpoint. We don't really want people to be able to edit the charts and edit the dashboards, because in an embedded context, that's not really the goal. And so because of that, it's kind of focused on what is the consumption UI, right? So what are the actual features that are needed for an embedded external application for people who will never know or never care that this is a preset. So that's a quick demo there. Here's another one, just kind of another quick example of a simple embedded demo here, where in this case, I've kind of tweaked the CSS a little bit more. I've kind of maintained the original border that's there for iframes by default. So just to go back, this feels more native, right? Like if you were just scrolling on the internet or you were on a news site, it'd be a little bit difficult to maybe tell that this was coming from Superset or preset, especially if you kind of style it and theme it even more. It could really look very, very native. In this case, we're kind of preserving more of the information that preset is there. It says filters here, right? There's the original dashboard title is still here. This feels much closer to, the fact that you're not really hiding the fact that it's embedded, right? You can even have this little drop-down menu right here, and you can download it as an image. So if you want to expose some of these features and you're okay that your end users are kind of aware that you're embedding things, then this is another option as well. So that's kind of a quick demo of it working. Super exciting, and I've been waiting for months to kind of play with it, and this was a good learning experience and a great way to kind of create these, kind of different kind of data apps and public experiences for people that don't need to have access to the tool itself. So that's kind of a quick demo there. So how does this actually work? So here's kind of an architecture diagram that I spent a bunch of time creating just yesterday, actually. So the way to think about it is you create your dashboard in preset. So nothing kind of new or different there. You're still using preset to build your charts, build your dashboard, still the same thing. And then for the preset backend, this is where obviously the dashboards, all the metadata about your assets are stored by us on our servers and in our database. And then we kind of wrap the Superset API and then extend it by adding all of our workspace specific stuff and adding things like our RBAC, all of the kind of proprietary preset stuff we also make available in the API, and you basically can interface with it. So on the left is kind of the preset layer, and in the middle is the kind of app layer. So the key thing you'll notice here is you need an app backend and a front end. If there's just one thing that you can take away from this demo, you do need both of these. We currently don't have a way to just drop in kind of a single iframe component into kind of a vanilla HTML or CSS app and do what I would call standalone embeds or a public dashboard experience that's purely kind of disconnected from any type of backend. That's not something we currently support. At some point we may, because I do know people ask about that. But for people who are building data apps and we're building kind of customer-facing dashboards, being able to control the experience, control the data that's accessed is super crucial. And that's something that came up a lot through our product discovery and customer interviews. And so we kind of realized that the biggest lever that we could use is making sure we have a highly controllable, highly configurable experience. You just can't do that if it's purely front end, because then it's just front end code, people can modify it. They can take your JavaScript. They can remove any row level security or data access stuff that you may have set up, and just get access to all of your data. So it's not really something anyone wants. And so this is why we kind of have both this back end and front end. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. So I'll show you the code that powers the example I just showed you. It's not even 100 lines of code. So you don't need a super fancy backend, but you do need a backend. And so the first step is you need your backend to query from the preset UI. You can get, if you're on the professional tier or the enterprise tier, you can request access to our API. And then in the preset UI, you'll be able to generate API tokens. So you can generate them. You can have multiple tokens per user. You can have, or you can share a token. It's kind of up to you. You can have one token for development and one for staging. So kind of whatever software development lifecycle best practices your organization uses, you can lean into that. You'll be shown your secret just once, of course. So you need to save that somewhere safe. And then your API token, of course, you can copy. It's more of a public key. And so you send that from your backend to our authentication API at preset, and then you get back a access token in just a few milliseconds. So this will just give you access to Preset's API in general. So I would consider this kind of request lifecycle focused on your app level. So if you have a single application and maybe you have a ton of embedded dashboards, you don't need to do this for every single dashboard or every single user. This kind of happens at your application level. This basically says, let's Preset know that you'll be making queries against the Preset API and that it's safe and secure. The token expires approximately every few hours, so I recommend it's a pretty fast. You get the new access token very quickly, so I do recommend kind of doing this call highly frequently, potentially even kind of at every request if you'd like to do that. Once you have the access token, then what you can do is define in kind of your own backend logic in your database. Define how users kind of map to dashboards, right? So in the situation I showed about 10 minutes ago, there's no logged in user, just for simplicity's sake. So we actually are fine just having kind of one global user ID. So you take the generic preset access token that you were given in the first flow, and then every time you want to show a dashboard, an embedded dashboard to your users, you need to go through this bottom flow. And the reason is because the guest token that the API will send back expires every 5 minutes. And if you make a new request, you get a different token as well. So this is important because when you're up here and users will be able to inspect their own guest token by just going to the browser console or looking at the DOM in the browser. So we deliberately want a guest token that people can access and is kind of just limited, so that it's not kind of spreading and that type of thing. So it's kind of an easily refreshable and easily expiring guest token, and it is called a guest token, right? So it's really meant to be temporary. And so every time you want to show a dashboard, an embedded dashboard, you will need to send the original preset access token you got up here, which again, you really only need to do at your application level or maybe even your server level if you have like a bunch of different apps. Send the dashboard ID. So I'll show in the next few slides where your dashboard ID is shown once you have embedded enabled. And in parentheses, you'll see RLS, which stands for row level security. So you basically send us the user. You say that all these users are in the Southeast sales region, for example. We'd like to add a where clause to all the kind of queries needed to power the charts in the dashboard we're showing them. So we're going to add a where clause and limit it to that specific region, and then kind of rinse and repeat for all of your user segments, right? And so being able to define RLS rules at the user level is really important. And then we just store a hash of the user ID, and this is actually optional. So if you just kind of want to manage this yourself or just send us kind of something kind of more of a generic user ID, you can do that as well. So it's kind of more about just maintaining the uniqueness of the user ID or user group to row level security. You get back a guest token very quickly. And once you have the guest token, then your backend can basically, with just 5 lines of JavaScript code, you run the embed dashboard function. You pass in the guest token, and so the front end, doesn't, obviously it knows who's logged in. So the user ID is only used for the front end to get the relevant guest token, for the backend to kind of request the relevant guest token. And then you have the guest token that's sent to the front end. The front end then just takes the kind of cookie cutter embed dashboard code that we have and renders the relevant dashboard. This is kind of the whole flow. You'll notice that the backend, as I mentioned earlier, the backend is needed because we don't want to move these two flows purely into the front end. We kind of want the signed, authenticated experience, which is really important. That's kind of the high-level overview. And you can imagine how this scales out, right? So if you have multiple apps, you kind of copy and paste this experience. If you have a ton of different users, same thing here. You just need to kind of you'll be sending requests more frequently and kind of defining your role level. Like you may even have your own database for all your RLS rules and all of your user IDs. So you can kind of imagine how the complexity grows, but the general architecture remains the same. So I did want to do a shout out to our preset embedded SDK documentation. I will share a link shortly. And basically, the whole point with this is I'll be kind of walking through each of these steps in the slides, but you don't need to feel like you need to write everything down because this documentation covers all the same things. So that's kind of just providing a visual overview of here's all the steps needed to get embedded working. I got it working in about an afternoon. And so I'm fairly confident most people can here as well. So first things first, access to preset embedded. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not kind of available by default. We are, if you want access to embedded, the first thing you need to do is reach out to our sales engineers, and they'll just kind of do some very basic qualification and just try to understand your use case. And so I'll share this link. So for anyone who wants to know like how to get access to embedded, just fill out this short form, and you'll hear back very quickly. So currently this is very much a gated experience. Eventually it may not be, but for now it is. So that's the first thing. So get access to preset embedded. I did want to talk about preset workspaces before I talk about the next step, which is, so you can have, this is the preset manager UI. Most people kind of have multiple workspaces. We actually do recommend you may want to have kind of an internal analytics workspace for your organization if you're using preset internally. And then I highly recommend having a separate workspace for just your embedded dashboards. Of course, you can always build it in your internal analytics workspace, export it and import it again to your embedded kind of focused workspace. So this is kind of a basic level of isolation. But just wanted to mention this because not everyone who uses Superset, for example, is familiar with preset workspaces. Each of these tiles are just individual Superset instances. If you click on it, you're taken to a Superset instance. So if you run Docker Compose up locally for Superset, what do you see? Imagine each of these kind of tiles being kind of separate Superset instances with isolation. And then we have kind of our role-based access control layer on top that manages who has access to what. So just setting the context here. So to enable embedded, once you've actually gotten access from our team at Preset, here are the steps you actually need to take to get the kind of first pieces of relevant information in that giant architecture diagram I showed you. So you go to the 3 dots in your dashboard, and so this lives at the dashboard level, right? So you go to your dashboard, and usually you do things like save as, download image. You might want to share a link to the dashboard or set up an email report. You'll now see a new button called Embed Dashboard. And so once you do this pops open this new floating modal, and this has all the kind of relevant information for or has part of the information that the front end preset embedded SDK needs to embed a dashboard. So you need a dashboard ID. It's kind of a random UUID, right, for your dashboard. It's not what you're going to see in the URL. It's a different dashboard ID. You need the kind of URL that is hosting the current Superset instance in preset, and so just the full kind of URL there. The workspace ID itself and the team ID. So here are kind of all the things that you need for that. What you can also do is specify the allowed domains. So if you're building a product and you're showing a lot of embedded dashboards, and again, in the name of isolation and security and constraints helping out here, if you only want a certain IP address or a certain domain to be able to send requests to the preset embedded API, this is your place to specify it. You can always activate it and refresh it as well, and the changes happen, propagate instantaneously. So the main things to note down are workspace, region, dashboard. Just copy and paste it. And again, you can always refer to it later. It's not going to disappear. Step one is to, so after you've done all that, step one is to actually integrate with the backend with the preset API. So I'll actually just quickly skip ahead to, this is the part of the architecture that we're actually focused on is this kind of bottom layer. So first, you'll need to authenticate with the preset API and get a preset access token. So this is kind of what I talked about earlier, right? You need to, for your app level or whatever kind of arbitrary service you're running, it just needs a general access token to access the preset API. It's not scoped or limited in really any way. You just go to our UI in Preset Manager and you just get an API token. It's kind of almost like a developer account. Is a good way to think about it. As I mentioned earlier, the preset API builds on the Superset API, so you'll notice a lot of the same routes and resources and names, except with kind of 15-20% of it is preset only. And I'll share a link to documentation as well if you want to look at our API. And as I mentioned kind of earlier, why do you need a backend at all, right? So specify user level security patterns to repeatedly fetch quickly expiring guest tokens. You don't want to do that on the front end. Preset embedded, as I mentioned earlier, also doesn't work as a standalone public dashboard, so you need that backend handholding there, and lastly to enable better sandboxing and security. So same background as before. And so now integrating the app backend with front end. So now that you already have a loop that's repeatedly getting your preset access token to just give you general access to the API, you're now ready to kind of have your backend and front end kind of interact with each other, right? So in your app backend, so this is the kind of app you're building that's going to show fantastic dashboards to your end users. You need to generate a payload dictionary with all the following information. And again, this is all documented. So this is more kind of to conceptually convey ideas here. So you'll need to send over user information like the user ID, which we take and store as a hash, resource type. So currently only dashboards, all the dashboards that you want to, all the kind of dashboard IDs that you want to grant to that user, and any RLS rules. So the where clauses that I mentioned earlier as well. You send a post request with this information to our API, and the routing and the endpoint is linked to your preset workspace. And so you include the payload and you also include the token. So you get the token first, and then you form this payload and you send it back to us, to our embedded workspace endpoint. Then preset API will return a guest token, a preset guest token for this user with the permissions you specified. You then take that guest token, you send it to your front end, and your front end knows once you use the preset embedded SDK, which I'll talk about in the next slide, it will know how to fetch the necessary information to show an iFrame. And this guest token expires quickly, so you'll want to. The way I've set it up is I fetch a new guest token every single time because it's fast, and it's just that you're always going to guarantee an authenticated experience that way. For the embedded SDK, so you have two options here. You can use npm to install the package. So just npm install, save it so it's added to your node modules directory, and then preset SDK embedded. Or you can use a script tag and just load it from this unpackaged CDN that we push to. So you have two different options. For this demo, I did the second one just to keep it simple and to make the code more intelligible. But for people who are building serious apps, they're probably going to do the first one. And the last step really is to embed the dashboard using the SDK itself. You basically need to fill out the embed dashboard function that the SDK library that I just talked about exposes. So there's a bunch of parameters. There's the ID parameter. This is a dashboard ID that the UI preset embed dashboard UI that I showcased earlier will give you. The domain, so your kind of full link to, this is what you would see in your when you open your workspace, this is the full URL that you see. This is also shown, by the way, in the embed dashboard UI, right? So you can just copy and paste it from there. The mount point. So this is a kind of classic vanilla JavaScript call, which is just get the element, get an element on the DOM by this ID. So the standard one is just my dash superset dash container. So you can call it whatever you want, of course. And this just says this, excuse me, this is the position that you're going to add, that I'd like the dashboard added to, and the iframe is added as an element with nested underneath that DOM element there. Fetch guest token. So this is the JavaScript function that you would like to use to query your backend and do all the steps that I talked about earlier, right? So just get the guest token. So if you for some reason, if you happen to have the guest token lying around in your backend, you can just return it. In most cases, as I mentioned, because it expires quickly, you'll want to get it by querying the preset API using all the payload and access token I talked about earlier. And lastly, dashboard UI config. So you have some limited customization options you can do. You can do way more, honestly, using CSS itself in your actual app that you're embedding the dashboard in. But you can do some basic things like control some of the aesthetics of the dashboard. Like you can hide the title, right? So if you don't want, in this case, I have kind of my own title, so I hid it. In this case, I kept the title just to show you both kind of examples. So this is a situation where I kept the title. And you can also hide some of the menus. So here, there's no menu. There's no three dots that you're normally used to seeing. It's just the charts themselves. But here, I do have the three dots, right? So that's another Boolean value that I just set when I made that call. Dashboard UI config. And this is how it works with the CDN. So if you're just doing a script tag, and this is what I did, so I'll show you that code in just a second. You'll notice that this is the pattern I followed because I didn't go through the whole NPM process there. And before I talk about best practices, I did want to showcase the code that I used to make this. So I've obviously obfuscated all the relevant tokens and things like that. So you'll notice this is a simple Flask app. It's 50 lines. Again, nothing too crazy. We have a index.html route, just goes to the home page. It just renders index.html. I have an example2 route, which renders a second example, standalone HTML page. And then I have this guest token. This is where the meat of the interesting stuff is. So this is the first step that I talked about in that diagram, right? So if we go back to this diagram, the first step is this. Send over the API token in the secret, get an access token. That's what I'm doing here. So I'm sending a request to API/v1/auth. I'm sending the token, I'm sending the secret. You have to also specify these headers. Again, this is documented, so don't need to write it down. You get a response. You'd rather send a post request, then you get the preset access token as part of the returned JSON. So that's your preset access token. I'm doing this every single time just to keep it simple for a demo, but that's probably overkill. You can honestly probably just do it once every few hours or kind of at the application level across kind of a large number of dashboards you might be embedding. And then this talk goes through the guest token part. So this is the bottom right here, right? So we send the user ID, we send the access token, dashboard ID, RLS. So here's the payload that I built for that. So we have the user, in this case, it's just me, username, first name, and last name. Again, this is, if you just want to treat this as kind of a ID or an index, you can. If you don't want to kind of implement the user pattern here, and the user model so heavily, you don't really need to. Resources, so type dashboard, which is really it's the only type right now, and the dashboard ID. So this is the dashboard ID that the embed dashboard UI showed, as I've talked about. And then RLS, so this is a list of row-level security clauses you can add. They're mostly just going to be where clauses. So you can do, where sales region equals southeast, sales region equals northeast. If you have multiple, they'll and them. So preset will take them and kind of put an and statement in between them. You can't specify an or, just put it in quotes. And again, this is documented. You form the bearer token, and then you do a post request. You send a request to our embedded kind of workspace level API route that we have. So teams, team ID, workspaces, workspace ID, and the guest token endpoint. You send the payload. You make sure to have the right headers that are in the documentation. You send it within a few milliseconds. You get back the guest token itself. And just turn it into JSON and send it to the front end. So pretty simple stuff right there. And I'll also quickly showcase my front end code if people are interested in that. So share. Here we go. This is my front end code. So I'm doing the script method, right? This is the old school way of using JavaScript. You call a JavaScript file from a third-party server. I am styling my iframe a little bit, just specifying the width, the height, the border. In the first one, I don't want a border, so I don't have one. I make a div block. This is just for the text. This is for the whole page. I just wrap the whole thing in a class and say, let's add some 10% margin on the left and the right just to make it look a little bit nicer. I don't want Times New Roman, so I put Tahoma. We have the div that I mentioned earlier. This is the first part of the text. And then the only thing I needed to do was create a dashboard container. That's the mount point. So you'll notice here, document.getElementById is dashboard container. So it's going to look for whichever DOM element has dashboard container and add the dashboard there. And then the actual call to get the dashboard happens in two places. So this is a function that just fetches the guest token from the backend. So that Python Flask app I just showed, all it does is gets the guest token. And in this case, you may want to add more user ID data, or you may want to add information from the front end to request a specific type of dashboard. I don't do any of that here, but as you build out your application, that's probably something you'll want to do. And then two, this is the preset SDK. This is the embed dashboard call. So this is actually what we're doing. You don't have to assign it to a variable. It's kind of up to you if you know how JavaScript works. It'll still work even if you just do preset SDK.embed. You have the dashboard ID. You have the Superset domain. You have the mount point here. The fetch guest token, which just maps to this function I defined above, and the dashboard UI config. You'll notice I kept my dashboard ID and Superset domain here. And this, again, reiterates the earlier point, which is even if you steal this information from me and try to embed this dashboard, it will not work because you don't have my preset API token. And so you can't just take this and embed it. It will not work. So comfortable showing it here, basically. And you'll notice in the second, this is example 2.html, this is the second URL. The only thing I did different here is I hid the tab. I set that to true. And I don't hide the border. So that's why you see a slightly modified experience. So pretty simple. And again, we have some great example code as well in our documentation. So I'll quickly share a link to documentation here in the chat. All right, here's a link to documentation. And then I'll go back to my slides and keep talking through that. We went through this. All right, just a few left, and then we'll take questions. I see there's a bunch, so excited to see the questions people have. So best practices I talked about earlier, right? Incorporate safeguards at multiple levels. It's especially important for embedded dashboards. It's a little bit less important for internal dashboards because it's not as problematic. But when you're exposing a dashboard to the entire internet, or even kind of to your users, right? You want to make sure that you're being very careful. So at every level, have safeguards. So if you have a separate database for this embedded dashboard, that's great. Ideally, it's limited access, right? When you register in preset, like make sure this role has no kind of CRUD permissions. It's kind of read only. You have this limited role. Having a separate database. So even if that goes down, it's not the end of the world, right? So really simple stuff, but it can go a long way. And ideally, use a separate preset workspace. So as I talked about earlier, you can sign up multiple preset workspaces. So instead of your NASA and your Mark Watney rescue mission workspace, you can use your customer embeds workspace. You can make a separate workspace just for the public dashboard that you're showing to the public. So if you want to do that, I highly recommend it because you're gonna have a better time. You're gonna have better isolation, and yeah. A few bonus features that I didn't really cover, but are in the docs. So one, continuous resizing of iFrame. You can definitely do this. So if you really wanted to feel like a consistent native dashboard experience in your application, you wanna have your iFrame kind of match the browser window, right? And so you can there's a get scroll size function. This method kind of asynchronously will query and return the full width and height of the embedded dashboard page. So kind of the page, the kind of the prison, so to speak, that this dashboard lives within. It's constantly giving that information so that so that the website itself that's hosting the embedded container can actually make sure to be aware of it, right? So you can kind of then modify your CSS here so that the iframe is consistently matching whatever rule that you want to set. So it's kind of a nice helper method to do just that. Two, the row level security roles do support Jinja, so this is kind of another way to create a more dynamic experience here. You can add Jinja kind of context and templating into your RLS queries, which I think is really cool. And lastly, I hope to do an entire separate event on this. So if you're interested in that, just stay subscribed to our newsletter or go to preset.io/events and check for it. But I want to take all of the stuff I talked about can be integrated with the dashboards as code workflow. We did 2 events on that in the last month or so. And so now you can imagine kind of building one shell of a dashboard in the preset UI, taking it and then, making it available to like tens of thousands of customers with very advanced specific RLS rules. You can have it live in your kind of GitHub version control workflow. So you can really start to take something that was historically very much kind of a manual GUI-based process and actually productize it without too much work. And so all this works with all that dashboard as code workflow because it's all kind of just using the preset API. So really exciting stuff. That's a whole event in and of itself that I'd like to do at some point. I also want to quickly mention before Q&A that we have this awesome new resources page. It's been out for a few months. I highly recommend checking it out. So even if you're a Superset user, we just took all the activities that we do to support the community. So we run a podcast. We have a blog. We have our own end user documentation. We have YouTube videos. We have our events that you're here at, right? So we just took all these and put them into a single page. It's preset.io/resources. So definitely check it out if you are interested and kind of want to learn more about Superset and preset. And with that, I will take questions. So let's look at what questions are there. Cool. So Jerry asks, I'm curious and sorry for such a silly question. What is the difference between preset and superset? Great question. So I kind of, you asked at the 6th minute, maybe I hadn't covered it by then, but this kind of does a pretty good job summarizing it. So Superset is a project housed within the Apache Software Foundation. And so it's not, we don't own the code, anything like that. It's vendor neutral, but anyone can take it and build kind of a commercial offering on top of it. Preset started by Max Büchemin, who also created Superset back at Airbnb. And basically, we're building an awesome service for Superset. So if you like Superset, you're tired of maintaining it, and you want the latest and greatest features, stuff that's kind of coming out every single week, you want compliance, single sign-on, all these other things, all of our awesome embedded features, support, training. If you want that, that's kind of what we're here to do. So I answered that one. C asks, how do you source control the dashboards within Preset? Great question. So it's related to kind of what I was talking about at the end. We have a series of blog posts that talks about how you can do the version control workflow using our SDK. So we have our own command line interface, or you can just use the API if you aren't big into Python. But basically, you take the assets that you've created, data sets, charts, dashboards, you've created them in the preset UI, and then you can export them essentially either from the command line or just from the UI itself. You take those gzipped assets and then you put them into version control. And we even support the usage of Jinja if you want to make the assets more dynamic. So if you want to take one dashboard and pump it into internal analytics that connects to one database, but then you want to do a different database if it's going into your embedded one, you can do just that. And so we have a number of blog posts on this. Just go to preset.io/blog and you can see it. I'll also paste the link here if people want to see that as well. Cool. Answered that. If you have follow-up questions, let me know. Okay, next question. Vinicius, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Hi, for my use case, I have a lot of different users and I want to show them their private data using the authentication we already have on our web platform. How could I do this? Embed this data from each user on each login session. It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, in many ways, you should use. I don't exactly know your full application architecture, of course, but I think in theory, you can just send our API the use kind of every single username or whatever unique identifier you have for users. It could be a UUID or a hash. You can just have a unique identifier for your users. You'll need to have that data available in preset, right? Any charts and dashboards, those still need to be all be created in preset. We're still kind of a visualization tool. We're still a BI tool. So you'll need to have all those in preset. And then you can use something like RLS. Like RLS is a very common, row level security is a common way that we've seen some of our customers do that isolation. So you can even have like, a data set in a table in your database. You have that registered in preset. You have a column that's maybe linked to a region or a set of users or a user ID. And you can just add a row level security clause for only show me the data, show each user the relevant data they have access to based on kind of row level security criteria. So that's definitely kind of one option that you can do. But yeah, so if you look at this, we don't. The key thing, another kind of key point that we want to convey is that your users do not need to log into preset. They don't need to know anything about preset. They never need to hear the name preset. If they're logged into your application, you can take the user ID and then route it through this whole lifecycle and show them the dashboard that's relevant to them, right? So they don't need to know anything about preset, or they don't have to have a preset account, none of that. We're kind of leading on you and your app lifecycle to manage all of that. So I hope that answers your question. Let me know if you have a follow-up one. Natalie asked, so there's an option to display existing dashboards from preset through the embedded option. Yeah, I mean, that's basically what we're doing, right? So when you go to step one, where is it? Here we go. Yeah, so this is an existing dashboard. So this is actually a dashboard I made like 6 months ago or something. And so I was like, oh, we need something for the demo. I wanted to do something with Google Sheets. So fun fact, this whole dashboard, the database is Google Sheets. It's not like, Druid or Postgres or kind of what I would say a real database, just to keep things lightweight. And because I don't want my database to go down and have to manage all of that for the sake of a demo, I actually did everything in Google Sheets. So any type of valid data source that you can register in preset, you can use as a data backend for your dashboards. And so, yeah, basically I went to an existing dashboard I already had. I had embedded already enabled in my workspace, and I clicked embed dashboard. I got all this information. So 100% this will work with existing embedded dashboards. You don't need to create a new fancy dashboard that's somehow different. It's the same dashboard. Sandeep says, thanks. Thank you. C asks, how do you do raw-based access control? Maybe row-based is what you're thinking. For instance, there is a dashboard for client stats, but data comes from the same table. I only want to display data to show client A data to client A and not the client's data. Yeah, so this is where row level security is what you need. And so if you look at this, right? So row level security lets you say you can have for each user you would have user ID. Let's say the user is the ID is just A. You have user ID ABC. You would, when you make your payload request to our API, you would say user ID A, row level security, user access equals A, or whatever column you have in your data set that you'd like to use for restricting the data. You can just use that as part of your row level security criteria. So in this case, we have this fictional example where for some reason we're showing data to Nintendo, we're showing data to Sony. We don't want them to be able to see each other's data, right? And so if you think about what you do at a SQL level, you can create one massive table, one massive data set, and just have a column that says, publisher, and you only show the data that's relevant to them. And so every query that's shown, that's powering a dashboard that Nintendo people will see, they will in their queries that are sent to your database, it'll say publisher equals Nintendo. That will be added to the where clause, right? And so that'll be rinsed and repeated for every single row level security user that you specify. So you can absolutely do this. In fact, what you just said is the ideal. Having one table with the criteria that maps to how to filter each user, that's actually the ideal situation for row level security and for this entire workflow. So absolutely, this will all work perfectly. So Deep, I'm more interested to have role-based access control while I integrate with my product. It should be SSO to preset and have role-based dashboard. I'm not quite following. Definitely, feel free to follow up with the clarification. Please control while integrated with my product. Yeah, so there's basically two. I think the way to think about it, right, is whatever existing role, like RBAC scheme you have in your application, you can map that. Like when we're exposing an embedded dashboard to you, to your users, you tell us what user information is relevant, right? So if you just want to have one massive global user, for example, in a way, like let's say you want to make a public dashboard and you don't really care about having a logged in experience, you can just send us kind of a generic username or an empty one. We're making that optional. Or you can say like, I'm already maintaining all the roles and permissions myself. I have a database where I have all that information. And so then you just make API requests with the relevant context. And so we just will return, our API will just return whatever relevant dashboard it is for your users. So I don't know if that answers your question. And I think to bridge to the earlier question, for embedded, we've heard from our customers that they don't want people to be logging into Preset to see their dashboard. And that's why we don't expose our single sign-on UI to end users for embedded dashboards. Vinicius, PS, my website's all in PHP. Yep, it works just fine. So the example I showed, my example, I'm a Python person, so I did it in Python. But you can translate all this code. All it's doing is making API requests. So find the relevant API request library for you. Take our documentation. You'll just need to update it a little bit and map it to PHP. But all of the backend code is language independent. It'll work in any backend language. You can even use JavaScript. You can do this all in Node.js if you'd like. For the front end, you're kind of out of luck. You do have to use JavaScript because that's what the web uses. So you do have to use whatever JavaScript that we all use. So that's the only caveat there. Esteban, does the free version have access to embedded dashboards? It does not, unfortunately. You do need to be on a professional tier. But I think our team might be able to work something out. So just if you're just a free user right now, just fill out that form that I showed earlier, and they should be able to hook you up one way or another. So traditionally it's not, but you could still, I'm sure we can find a way to get you access. Anonymous attendee, embedded is limited to dashboards only. We can't do charts at this time, correct? Yes, as far as I know, you cannot do charts yet, but that is almost surely going to change. I don't know exactly when, unfortunately, but eventually charts would be awesome. Definitely agree. That's definitely something I would expect sometime. I just don't know when. But yes, right now, only dashboards. Derek, how responsive are the embedded dashboards on mobile? I'll be honest, I gotta say, I don't think you can probably do it. I have seen people do mobile dashboards using Superset and Preset. There's been some PRs that have helped make the default kind of mobile experience better for just Superset. I'm not even talking about embedded. This is just in general showing kind of our dashboard UI and chart UI just working better in mobile. And with that asynchronous scrolling function, get scroll dimensions I talked about, you can even go one step further and make sure that it looks great for different viewports and different mobile versus tablet form factors. So I think you can get pretty close, but it's still the web, right? So like that's the caveat, right? If your users are okay with a mobile web dashboard experience, then I think it should work great because dashboards itself are mobile friendly, and then it's just up to you to make sure the iframes are resized. So you'll have to do a little bit of work, making sure that the iframe is matching, the container is matching, but the dashboards themselves are relatively mobile friendly in terms of just kind of looking nice on the viewport, rescaling nicely. So if you have like three dashboards on one row, I believe three charts on one row, it'll kind of verticalize it. So it should work. Multizeme, how much of this is possible in Superset? Good question. Excuse me. How much is this possible in Superset? It's definitely possible in Superset. So we wrap the Superset embedded SDK. So if you go here, you can read all about it, and you'll notice the flow is similar. It's a little bit more work. The diagram that I showed earlier won't be exactly relevant because the preset API offers superior functionality and that type of thing. But yeah, there are people who've used the Superset embedded SDK to do this. Ultimately, we ship Superset, right? Like, so what we're doing is wrapping a Superset functionality. So if you're willing to sweat it out, if you have a team of like 5-6 engineers and you're able to handle all of the authentication, the multi-Superset workspace layer, build your own OAuth system, and you know how to do all that stuff and keep Superset up and running, maintain all the security patches. If you have a team that's able to do that, then you can definitely just use Superset embedded SDK. For the teams that don't have that, that's kind of why we built preset embedded SDK. Next question, Andrew. So I have just 4 or 5 minutes left, so I'll probably speed through these questions a little bit more. Andrew asks, is there a way to track dashboard performance? Time from embedded SD call to dashboard fully loaded. Yeah, you can. You'll just need to do this. I believe our front-end SDK does not yet offer any specific performance monitoring tools, but you can just use your generic performance monitoring, right? So you can add logging. You can also get fancy. For example, when the dashboard loads, you can have that happen first asynchronously, have the Superset kind of spinner happen for a second or two. You can kind of do that before you do any type of pixel painting on the page. And also, like, this is the type of thing that actually existing monitoring and logging tools are probably best for. You don't really, in my opinion, need anything that's specific to embedded dashboards. You can use your same type of thing. I think the only thing probably that's maybe a little bit of black box is just the iFrame container is a black box. That's probably maybe where your question is going, is like, how do I know how quickly, I've loaded the iFrame, says it's loaded. The browser thinks the iFrame is loaded, but maybe it took 10 minutes for some reason for that dashboard to load. So I don't think we have anything yet for that. But definitely, that's a good feature request and something that we should do. So I don't, as far as I know, we don't have any, we don't give any data there, but we are building analytics around this whole thing because people are building products for embedded dashboards. So you can expect all that functionality to slowly trickle out because this is going to be really important for users. Anonymous attendee asks, is it possible for us to pass details entered in our app to be used as filters? Say the user enters a specific state, say California. Can they be sent to the embedded dashboard and see the dashboard already filtered to California orders? I think it is probably possible. What you can do is you probably will have to use RLS for that. Where you can basically, for us, we don't really care how you define your RLS, right? So let me scroll down. So you could do something like for every single, so this is the payload you send us. You send the embedded API. So every single time This payload is formed on your app backend, and whoops, this payload is formed on your app backend, and so your front end can give the backend context that the user has provided, right? So if the user chose California in the UI, you can mutate this section, and when you send us the embedded API, when you call the embedded API, you can say, I have this RLS. You can even say the same user, right? Like you can just change your RLS criteria to say, okay, I would like to send, I'd like the data to be filtered to California. I'd like the data to be filtered to New York. So you can absolutely do that. In fact, I can't say who, but we do have a relatively large customer that you've definitely heard of that does it just this way. So they kind of have a very limited UI. And then that kind of basically requests dashboards on demand based on what they chose. So you can absolutely do that. And if you reach out to our sales engineering team, they can help you set that up if you're having issues with it. Omri asked, does preset embedded support in rendering inside another iFrame? I don't think it does. You run into a lot of issues. Well, first I will say like this, just to be 100% clear, like this is an iFrame. Just in case that was unclear, this isn't just like a div tag and the charts are coming natively. If you do an inspect here, you will notice that there won't actually be all the JavaScript, CSS and stuff for the actual rendering here will not be there. You'll just see a black box iframe. So just in case that's unclear. In terms of like nesting iframes, I don't think it works just because of probably cores issues. I also don't recommend it, to be honest. And at this time, we don't support standalone iframes, right? So I know some people might want to take this and embed it in Salesforce or something. You do need a backend right now. At some point, we may have a standalone version, but we don't at the moment. Kimo, hey Kimo, great to see you. Is the Explore/tab also in the roadmap or just charts and dashboards? That's a good question. I know a lot of people want to expose that as well. I'm not, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I do know that there are people, like if you go back to our events, like Viva Health did a great community event where they showcased that they actually expose everything, I think even SQL Lab, to their end users. And I gotta say, I think when you're getting closer to embedding more and more of the experience, I actually think you can do that right now by just either you can create a public role which has its own risks, or you can bridge your own authentication with the roles in Superset or Preset, and then just give them the whole application. I still think that if you want to do that, that's probably a better experience. Yeah, so unclear. I don't really know. It's not something that we get a lot. Only a few people ask for, hey, I want Explore exposed. I want SQL Lab exposed. I want people to be able to upload data. Like those are pretty rare requests for us. So I think as we start to see more, definitely reach out to our team and let them know this is something I'd like to see. And it could be something that gets prioritized. But in the short and medium term, it's not something I think that we'll likely do. Awesome. So we're at time. I'm looking through the chat. Oh, I see one question, Renee. Can you apply your own font and colors to the embedded dashboard? Yeah, you absolutely can. So we're just embedding a dashboard, right? So if you want, you can tweak the CSS at the preset dashboard level. You can't do it in this UI. You have to go to the dashboard itself and do it there. So you can do it here. So that's where I would do it. So hope that answers your question. Great. Well, we're at time. Thanks everyone for coming. I hope people found this useful. We will share our recording, as I mentioned earlier, and feel free to reach out if you have more questions, or you would, if you have more questions, definitely reach out. I'll share the link one more time. So I'll share the link to the documentation if people are interested. And if you have more questions, definitely reach out to our sales engineering team, and they can help you get whatever questions you have, or if you run into issues, they can help you with that as well. So thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.